Welcome to the campfire. Come and sit, for the night is cold and dark, and we have stories to tell you. Tonight, we should talk a little of the ghoulies, the ghosties, the long-leggedy beasties, the things that go bump in the night, the eyes that follow you in the dark. Sit a little closer so we may begin. The Smiling Man. About 5 years ago, I lived downtown in the city. Now, I've always been a night person, so I would often find myself bored after my roommate, who was decidedly not a night person, went to sleep. To pass the time, I used to go for long walks and spend the time thinking. I spent 4 years like that, walking alone at night, and never once had a reason to feel afraid. I always used to joke with my roommate that even the drug dealers in the city were polite. But all of that changed in just a few minutes of one evening. It was a Wednesday, somewhere between 1 and 2 in the morning, and I was walking in a park quite a ways from my apartment, and it was a quiet night, and even for a weeknight, with very little traffic and almost no one on foot. The park, as it was most nights, was completely empty. It was a full moon out. I could almost imagine the moon had a face, that the man in the moon was smiling down on me. That thought made me smile. I turned down a short side street in order to loop back to my apartment when I first noticed him. At the far end of the street, on my side, was the silhouette of a man, dancing. It was a strange dance, similar to a waltz, but he finished each box with an odd stride forward. I guess you could say he was dance walking, headed straight for me. Deciding he was probably drunk, I stepped as close as I could to the road to give him the majority of the sidewalk to pass me by. The closer he got, the more I realized how gracefully he was moving. He was very tall and lanky and wearing an old suit. He danced closer still, and I couldn't make out his face. His eyes were open wide and wild. His head tilted back slightly, looking off at the sky. His mouth was formed in a painfully wide cartoon of a smile. Between the eyes and the smile, I decided to cross the street before he danced any closer. I took my eyes off him to cross the empty street. As I reached the other side, I glanced back and then stopped dead in my tracks. He had stopped dancing and was standing with one foot in the street, perfectly parallel to me. He was facing me, but still looking skyward. Smile still on his lips. I was completely and utterly unnerved by this. I started walking again, but kept my eyes on the man. He didn't move. Once I'd put about a half a block between us, I turned away from him for a moment to watch the sidewalk in front of me. The street and the sidewalk ahead of me were completely empty. Still unnerved, I looked back to where he had been standing to find him gone. For the briefest of moments, I felt relieved, until I noticed him. He had crossed the street and was now slightly crouched down. I couldn't tell for sure due to the distance and the shadows, but I was certain he was facing me. I had looked away from him for no more than 10 seconds, so it was clear that he had moved fast. I was so shocked that I stood there for some time staring at him, and then he started moving toward me again. He took giant, exaggerated tiptoe steps as if he were a cartoon character sneaking up on someone, except he was moving very, very quickly. I'd like to say at this point that I ran, or pulled out my pepper spray, or my cell phone, or anything at all, but I didn't. I just stood there, completely frozen, as the smiling man crept toward me. And then he stopped again, about a car length away from me, still smiling his smile, still looking to the sky. I opened my mouth to speak, but he spoke first.
It's in the light. The moon came in. He found me through the mirror. Moonlight, white like eyes. Not light, but blood. I drown in him. If you are afraid, we will look together.
I was too afraid to take my eyes off of him, to look up at the moon. I was afraid that the moon, too, would be smiling at me. When I finally found my voice, I blurted out the first thing that came to mind. What I meant to ask was, "What do you want?" In an angry, commanding tone. What came out was a whimper. "What?" Regardless of whether or not humans can smell fear, I can certainly hear it, and I heard it in my own voice, and that only made me more afraid. But he didn't react to it at all. He just stood there, smiling. And then, after what felt like forever, he turned around very slowly and started dance walking away. Just like that. Not wanting to turn my back to him again, I just watched him go until he was far enough away to almost be out of sight. I looked up now. The moon was smiling at me. But this no longer made me smile. I looked away with a flush of adrenaline in my stomach. I looked to see where the man was, and I found him. And I realized something. He wasn't moving away anymore, nor was he dancing. I watched in horror as the distant shape of him grew larger and larger. He was coming back my way, and this time he was running. I ran as well. I ran until I was off the side road and back onto a better lit road with sparse traffic. Looking behind me then, he was nowhere to be found. The rest of the way home, I kept glancing over my shoulder, always expecting to see his stupid smile. But he was never there. I lived there for another 6 months after that night. I never went out for another walk. There was something about his face that always haunted me. He didn't look drunk, and he didn't look high. He looked completely and utterly insane. And that's a very, very scary thing to see. But you know, sometimes when I see the moon, I can almost imagine that the moon has a face, and that the man in the moon is smiling down on me. And that thought makes me smile. The feeling of being watched can be unsettling, can't it? But the feeling of being watched over, that is precious, a thing of beauty. And all too often, It is fleeting, like a good story, or this campfire. They provide comfort and warmth, protection, but they are not meant to last. Add something to the fire, and let me share something beautiful, something precious but fleeting with you. The Price by Neil Gaiman. Tramps and vagabonds have marks that they leave on gateposts and trees and doors, letting others of their kind know a little about the people who live at the houses and farms they pass on their travels. I think cats must leave similar signs. How else do we explain the cats who turn up at our door through the year, hungry and flea-ridden and abandoned? We take them in. We get rid of the fleas and the ticks, feed them and take them to the vet. We pay for them to get their shots, and, indignity upon indignity, we have them neutered or spayed. And they stay with us for a few months, or for a year, or forever. Most of them arrive in summer. We live in the country, just the right distance out of town for the city dwellers to abandon their cats near us. We never seem to have more than 8 cats, and rarely have less than 3. The cat population of my house is currently as follows: Hermione and Pod, Tabby and Black respectively, the Mad Sisters, who live in my attic office, and who do not mingle. Princess, the blue-eyed, long-haired white cat, who lived wild in the woods for years before she gave up her wild ways for soft sofas and beds. And last, but largest, Furball, Princess's cushion-like calico long-haired daughter, orange and black and white, whom I discovered as a tiny kitten in our garage one day, strangled and almost dead, her head poked through an old badminton net, and who surprised us all by not dying, but instead growing up to be the best-natured cat I have ever encountered. And then there's the black cat, who has no name other than the Black Cat, who turned up almost a month ago. We did not realize he was going to be living here at first. He looked too well fed to be a stray, too old and jaunty to have been abandoned. He looked like a small panther, and he moved like a patch of night. One day in the summer, he was lurking about our ramshackle porch, 8 or 9 years old at a guess, male, greenish yellow of eye, very friendly, quite unperturbable. I assumed he belonged to a neighboring farmer or household. I went away for a few weeks to finish writing a book, and when I came home, he was still on our porch, living in an old cat bed one of the children had found for him. He was, however, almost unrecognizable. Patches of fur had gone, and there were deep scratches on his gray skin. The tip of one ear was chewed away. There was a gash beneath one eye, a slice gone from one lip. He looked tired and thin. We took the black cat to the vet, where we got him some antibiotics, which we fed him each night, along with soft cat food. We wondered who he was fighting. Princess, our white, beautiful, near-feral queen? Raccoons? A rat-tailed fanged possum? Each night the scratches would be worse. One night his side would be chewed up. The next it would be his underbelly, raked with claw marks and bloody to the touch. When I got to that point, I took him down to the basement to recover, beside the furnace and the piles of boxes. He was surprisingly heavy, the black cat, and I picked him up and I carried him down there with a cat basket and a litter bin and some food and water. I closed the door behind me. I had to wash the blood from my hands when I left the basement. He stayed down there for 4 days. At first he seemed too weak to feed himself. A cut beneath one eye had rendered him almost one-eyed, and he limped and lolled weakly, thick yellow pus oozing from the cut in his lip. I went down there every morning and every night, and I fed him, and I gave him antibiotics, which I mixed with his canned food, and I dabbed the worst of the cuts, and I spoke to him. He had diarrhea, and although I changed his litter daily, the basement stank evilly. The 4 days that the black cat lived in the basement were a bad 4 days in my house. The baby slipped in the bath and banged her head and might have drowned. I learned that a project I had set my heart on, adapting Hope Mirralee's novel Blood in the Mist for the BBC, was no longer going to happen, and I realized that I did not have the energy to begin again from scratch, pitching it to other networks or to other media. My daughter left for summer camp and immediately began to send home a plethora of heart-tearing letters and cards, 4 or 5 or 6 each day, imploring us to take her away. My son had some kind of fight with his best friend, to the point where they were no longer on speaking terms. And returning home one night, my wife hit a deer who ran out in front of the car. The deer was killed. The car was left undrivable, and my wife sustained a small cut over one eye. By the 4th day, the cat was prowling the basement, walking haltingly but impatiently between the stacks of books and comics, the boxes of mail and cassettes, of pictures and of gifts and of stuff. He mewed at me to let him out, and reluctantly, I did so. He went back to the porch and slept there for the rest of the day. The next morning, there were deep, new gashes in his flanks, and clumps of black cat hair, his, covered the wooden boards of the porch. Letters arrived that day from my daughter, telling us that camp was going better, and that she thought she could survive a few days. My son and his friends sorted out their problem, although what the argument was about, trading cards, computer games, Star Wars, or a girl, I would never learn. The BBC executive who had vetoed Blood in the Mist was discovered to have been taking bribes, questionable loans, from an independent production company, and was sent home on permanent leave. His successor, I was delighted to learn when she faxed me, was the woman who had initially proposed the project to me before leaving the BBC. I thought about returning the black cat to the basement, but I decided against it. Instead, I resolved to try and discover what kind of animal was coming to our house each night, and from there, to formulate a plan of action, to trap it perhaps. For birthdays and at Christmas, my family gives me gadgets and gizmos, pricey toys which excite my fancy but ultimately rarely leave their boxes. There's a food dehydrator and an electric carving knife, a bread-making machine, and last year's present, a pair of see-in-the-dark binoculars. On Christmas Day, I had put the batteries into the binoculars and had walked about the basement in the dark, too impatient to even wait for nightfall, stalking a flock of imaginary starlings. You were warned not to turn it on in the light. That would have damaged the binoculars and quite possibly your eyes as well. Afterwards, I had put the device back into its box, and it sat there still, in my office, beside the box of computer cables and forgotten bits and pieces. Perhaps, I thought, if the creature, dog, cat, or raccoon, or what have you, were to see me sitting on the porch, it would not come. So I took a chair into the box and coat room, little larger than a closet, which overlooks the porch, and when everyone in the house was asleep, I went out onto the porch and bade the black cat good night. That cat, my wife had said, when he first arrived, is a person. And there was something very person-like in his huge leonine face, his broad black nose, his greenish-yellow eyes, his fanged but amiable mouth, still leaking amber pus from the right lower lip. I stroked his head, and I scratched him beneath the chin, and I wished him well. Then I went inside and turned off the light on the porch. I sat on my chair in the darkness, inside the house with the see-in-the-dark binoculars on my lap. I had the binoculars switched on, and a trickle of greenish light came from the eyepieces. Time passed in the darkness. I experimented with looking at the darkness with the binoculars, learning to focus, to see the world in shades of green. I found myself horrified by the number of swarming insects I could see in the night air. It was as if the night world were some kind of nightmarish soup swimming with life. Then I lowered the binoculars from my eyes and stared out at the rich blacks and blues of the night, empty and peaceful and calm. Time passed. I struggled to keep awake. I found myself profoundly missing cigarettes and coffee, my two lost addictions. Either of them would have kept my eyes open, but before I had tumbled too far into the world of sleep and dreams, a yowl from the garden jerked me awake fully. I fumbled the binoculars to my eyes and was disappointed to see that it was merely Princess, the white cat, streaking across the front garden like a patch of greenish-white light. She vanished into the woodlands to the left of the house and was gone. I was about to settle myself back down when it occurred to me to wonder what exactly had startled Princess so. And I began scanning the middle distance with the binoculars, looking for a huge raccoon, a dog, or a vicious possum. And there was indeed something coming down the driveway, toward the house. I could see it in the binoculars, clear as day. It was the devil. I had never seen the devil before, and although I had written about him in the past, if pressed, I would have confessed that I had no belief in him, other than as an imaginary figure, tragic and Miltonian. The figure coming up the driveway was not Milton's Lucifer. It was the devil. My heart began to pound in my chest, to pound so hard that it hurt. I hoped it could not see me, that in a dark house, behind window glass, I was hidden. The figure flickered and changed as it walked up the drive. One moment it was dark, bull-like, minotaurish, and the next it was slim and female, and the next it was a cat itself, a scarred, huge, gray-green wildcat, its face contorted with hate. There are steps that lead up to my porch, 4 white wooden steps in need of a coat of paint. I knew that they were white, although they were, like everything else, green through my binoculars. At the bottom of the steps, the devil stopped and called out something that I could not understand. 3, perhaps 4 words in a whining, yowling language that must have been old and forgotten when Babylon was young. And although I did not understand the words, I felt the hairs raise on the back of my head as it called. And then I heard, muffled through the glass but still audible, a low growl, a challenge. And slowly, unsteadily, a black figure walked down the steps of the house, away from me, toward the devil. These days, the black cat no longer moved like a panther. Instead, he stumbled and rocked, like a sailor only recently returned to land. The devil was a woman now. She said something soothing and gentle to the cat in a tongue that sounded like French, and reached out a hand to him. He sank his teeth into her arm, and her lip curled, and she spat at him. The woman glanced up at me then, and if I had doubted that she was the devil before, I was certain of it now. The woman's eyes flashed red fire at me, but you can see no red through the night vision binoculars, only shades of green. And the devil saw me. Through the window, it saw me. I am in no doubt about that at all. The devil twisted and writhed, and now it was some kind of jackal, a flat-faced, huge-headed, bull-necked creature, halfway between a hyena and a dingo. There were maggots squirming in its mangy fur, and it began to walk up the stairs. The black cat leapt upon it, and in seconds they became a rolling, writhing thing, moving faster than my eyes could follow. All this in silence. And then a low roar. Down the country road at the bottom of our drive, in the distance, lumbered a late-night truck, its blazing headlights burning bright as green suns through the binoculars. I lowered them from my eyes and saw only darkness, and the gentle yellow of headlights, and then the red of rear lights as it vanished off again into the nowhere at all. But I raised the binoculars once more, There was nothing to be seen, only the black cat on the steps, staring up into the air. I trained the binoculars up and saw something flying away. A vulture, perhaps, or an eagle. And then it flew beyond the trees and was gone. I went out onto the porch. I picked up the black cat, and I stroked him, and I said kind, soothing things to him. He mewed piteously when I first approached him, but after a while he went to sleep on my lap. And I put him in his basket. I went upstairs to my bed to sleep myself. There was dried blood on my t-shirt and jeans the following morning. That was a week ago. The thing that comes to my house does not come every night, but it comes most nights. We know it by the wounds on the cat and the pain that I can see in those leonine eyes. He has lost the use of his front left paw, and his right eye is closed for good. I wonder what we did to deserve the black cat. I wonder who sent him. Been selfish and scared? I wonder how much more he has to give. Our fire is almost out, the flames dying, but it is just as well. My eyelids have grown heavy, and I'm sure you have places to visit and people to see, but you know where to find us, and we look forward to our next meeting. Be careful out there in the cold, in the dark. Please, come back soon and hear more stories and warm yourself by the campfire.